A silent prayer and a walk is being held for the victims of the Johannesburg CBD fire, which claimed 77 lives. Let's cross now to our reporter, eNCA's Heidi Giokos, who is on that walk. Heidi, a very warm good morning to you, a colleague. I mean, once again, we're still placing the spotlight on the Johannesburg CBD building that caught fire, claiming 77 lives. And even though we saw EMS, recovering the remains from the building, we also heard from the likes of the SAPS then being handed over that building and that scene so they can conduct the investigations. There are seemingly still, some, campaigns expected, such as the walk, just in honor of those who lost their lives. Take us through what's expected.
Yes, so we do understand that there is going to be a silent prayer and walk here at the Usindiso building that caught fire last week Thursday, claiming the lives of 77 people. Dumelo, I'm going to ask my colleague Teddy to perhaps just give you a glimpse of what the building looks like at the moment. It has been completely cornered off, and we have been asked by JMPD officials to not cross the barrier line, understandably so, given the fact that this building has been handed over to the South African Police Service for further investigation. And we did hear from Provincial Police Commissioner Elias Mawela that it's going to take some time before we at all realize or understand what actually caused the fire last week Thursday. You can still see evidence of people really trying to survive and jump out of this building with curtains, blankets still hanging over broken windows. I must say that having been here from last week Thursday and having been here on the scene almost immediately when the news broke, there was a very different smell, and I must say that smell has since subsided in terms of that fire that really gutted this building. But we do know that there's going to be a silent walk and prayer. We do know that the Speaker of Council, Colleen Makubele, will be here. Actually, we have seen her together with faith-based leaders across the city. We also know that the Anglican Church Bishop Thabo Makgoba is also going to be here, and the South African Council of Churches will also be here for that silent prayer and walk here in the city. But that is all good and well, Dumelo, for there to be silent prayers and walks and a remembrance of what actually happened here. But at the end of the day, the fundamental issue remains hijacked buildings and what is being done by the city to deal with these hijacked buildings, given the fact that this has been an ongoing issue, a pressing issue for some time. And officials claim that they have been doing all they can to deal with this, yet many would argue that there's about over 600 buildings in the city of Johannesburg. Yesterday, I was speaking to you on your show where we highlighted one of those buildings. That's just one of how many. So there is a clear, deeper issue here that needs to urgently be addressed.
And also, I mean, any accountability so far at all been taken, Heidi? That we've seen a lot of finger pointing between NGOs and government officials. We've also heard from Premier Panyaza Lesufi saying that a commission of inquiry, an independent one, would be set up to investigate and ascertain exactly what happened inside that building that caused that fire. That all in well, as you mentioned, colleague, but has there been anyone who's taken accountability as yet?
And I think that's the difficulty here, Dumelo, is who's going to come out and take accountability for the lives that were lost here? Who's going to come out and take accountability for the fact that the city has almost zero services? The fact that the city has been a major issue. There are over 600 hijacked buildings. How did we get to the number 600? Who's going to take responsibility and accountability? And interestingly enough, yesterday, the Roads and Transport MMC, Kemi Kunene, really came out throwing jabs at the Gauteng Premier, saying that the Premier is not allowing the city to conduct its work. But the question is, what is the city doing about all these buildings? It's always very reactive. When there's a tragedy, then there's suddenly some sort of action that is taken. I think what many are also asking is, yes, it's all good and well for a commission of inquiry to have been established, but the scope of that commission of inquiry should perhaps be a little bit broader to look at what is being done about these hijacked buildings, especially because there's so much finger pointing. You have the MMC for Public Safety saying that, he's been on this program to tackle these hijacked buildings, but he's being litigated left, right and centre. So the Premier might have to broaden his scope in terms of not only looking at what happened at this particular building that claimed the lives of 77 people, but what is being done and what has been done and why it has not continued in terms of tackling these hijacked buildings. We're not talking about 10 buildings here, Tumelo. We're talking about over 600, according to the former mayor, Herman Mashaba, and that was when he was still mayor. Has that number increased? That is something that officials need to answer to, and I think what's alarming for me, having covered this story, is that when you ask these questions to these officials, they become very defensive and they don't want to answer to you or answer the questions that are being posed, and you are literally being told that you are asking these tough questions to the wrong people, which, you know, who do you ask? Because this administration has changed I don't know how many times since, for example, Herman Mashaba, that was on an aggressive campaign to deal with these buildings. So perhaps the finger pointing should stop and these officials should answer. And I'm hoping to get more perspective also from the Speaker, Colleen Makubele, who must also answer to this because she is in this current administration.
That would be very interesting to hear. Hopefully that will lead us to some, tangible results, Heidi, because, if we're talking about, for example, the Commission of Inquiry, who needs to take accountability, we're over-fatigued, I suppose, even South Africans, when it comes to commissions, task teams that will provide recommendations, but nothing will come out of those recommendations. Take the Bank of Lisbon, for instance. That building out in Johannesburg caught fire. 5 years later, still no report whatsoever. Investigations still pending in terms of ascertaining what exactly happened. So is there confidence that this Commission of Inquiry will also bear some fruit? I think at this stage there's so much fatigue and answers needed on the ground. But I'll leave it to you, colleague, as you still remain on the scene and expected to speak to the Speaker of Council, Colleen Makubele, as well as other members who are expected to make their way there. A silent prayer, a walkabout is expected this morning, amongst others. We know that Mr. Makhuba will also be present, leading the procession, because 77 lives were lost, particularly in that vicinity that eNCA reporter Heidi Giokos stands. And I'll cross to her for any developments as soon as they are available.